On first inspection, Mortal Shell seems like the quintessential example of a Souls-like. It has many of the aspects you'd expect, like a dark and brutal setting, fierce combat, and challenging enemies. However, Mortal Shell is much more approachable than its peers. It's less difficult in general, and the overall scope of the game is much smaller, making it easier to get through and understand. While it's lacking in a few areas, the solid foundation is enough to keep you going.
Pray, what wayward spirit beckons?
Mortal Shell takes place in a harsh and unforgiving world, filled with peril and dread. The game opens with the player character awakening as a mysterious entity referred to as a Mortal Shell. After a quick combat tutorial, you're transported to the mysterious land of Fulgrim, where your journey begins. Reminiscent of many other Souls-likes, you get a basic framework for the story naturally by progressing and speaking with characters along the way, but many aspects remain mysterious and open to interpretation. Also similar are the locations of Mortal Shell, which are tightly packed with multiple paths to explore. However, there are only a handful of zones, and the quality is inconsistent, with some layouts giving you a good sense of discovery, while others are disappointingly small and straightforward.
The perversity of living has always been its ever-changing nature.
Unlike many RPGs where you select a class at the beginning, in Mortal Shell, there are 4 different bodies that serve different roles, and you switch between them throughout the course of the same playthrough. Harris, for example, is a well-rounded knight with decent health and stamina, while Teal sports high stamina but low health and a superior dodge roll. There are no typical stats to invest in, like vitality or strength, but each body has its own skill tree, with abilities that none of the others share. For instance, Teal has a talent that allows him to sprint without losing stamina, while Harris can reduce the cooldown of the hardening mechanic by 25%. You can switch between bodies freely in the hub, but you need special items to do so out in the world. Overall, body swapping is a nice twist on the class system. It makes it easy to experiment with different builds. Combat includes basic elements such as light attacks, heavy attacks, and dodges, but blocking works differently. Unlike most games where you use a weapon or shield to block, your body instead hardens into stone. You can harden anytime, even in the middle of an attack, but you can't do so repeatedly since the ability is on a cooldown. It's a great mechanic that adds an extra layer of strategy, but it's also a little too powerful since it recharges so quickly. It's easy to frequently whittle down powerful enemies simply by waiting to recharge between attacks, which takes away a lot of the tension. However, it's still an interesting mechanic that helps to differentiate the game's combat. You're also able to parry enemies, opening the window for special bonus strikes like a deadly spin attack or a thrust that restores health. Although to do this you need resolve, which takes the form of a meter that can be built up in combat or by using certain items. Landing parries is always fun, and it's nice to have some extra bonuses tied to them. Death is commonplace, but it's handled somewhat differently, keeping with the game's body-swapping mechanic. Instead of dying immediately, your Mortal Shell is instead knocked from the host body, leaving you in a vulnerable state. If you die here, it's all over, but if you manage to make it back to your body, your health will be fully restored. Mortal Shell isn't the first game to experiment with a system like this, but it works well and ties in nicely with the game's mythos. In line with the rest of the game's scope, the weapon selection is rather modest. There are a total of 4 weapons to play around with, including a giant 2-handed sword and a hammer and chisel. Thankfully, weapons feel drastically different from one another due to unique movesets and special attacks. The hollowed sword allows you to perform a spike thrust, while the Martyr's Blade comes with an ice attack. It's also worth mentioning that you need to battle a mini-boss each time you want a new weapon. It's mildly amusing at first, but it gets dull pretty fast, since the encounters are never very exciting. Even though Mortal Shell is easier than most in the genre, if you're not careful, you can still get taken out quickly. There are a fair amount of enemy types scattered throughout the game, as well as a handful of bosses to test your skills. Unfortunately, most of the bosses are pretty forgettable and don't pose much of a challenge, especially after you upgrade your weapon a little. There are a couple interesting ones that push back more, but in general, it's disappointing that they don't present a greater threat or do anything that exciting. Compared to other action RPGs, Mortal Shell is relatively short, as a first playthrough takes about 12 to 15 hours. That may seem like a negative for some, but it feels appropriate for how much content there is. Once you finish your first round, New Game Plus becomes available, which includes further upgrades and more challenging enemies. It's a common addition, but always appreciated.
So, do we have an accord?
While Mortal Shell may not stand at the upper echelon of the genre, there's still plenty to enjoy. The combat and world are engaging, and its swappable body system feels unique and fresh. Despite its shortcomings, Mortal Shell brings enough new ideas to the table, and with less pressure and investment required, there's plenty of freedom to experiment with them.
It's been so long since anyone raised a hand toward me in kindness. You seem different, untouched by false truths. Unfortunately, I have little to offer you.
Easy Allies reviews are made possible by generous viewers just like you. If you like what you see, check out patreon.com/easyallies to help us make more. For just $1 a month, you can gain access to weekly updates, spoiler discussions, and exclusive shows.